the federal government is trying to enforce something that's pretty clearly a federal matter, that is immigration, and we've got the Chicago police force not responding to a call. We have governors and mayors who are actively urging people to resist federal law, even to make sanctuary areas where the federal government cannot go. Where's this all going to lead if we're not careful?
It is clear to me, after going through 4 years of this with President Biden, that the Democratic Party today believes that vetting people at the border is racist. I think it's prudent, but there's no doubt in my mind. Some will say it, others try to mask it, but that they just believe in open borders. Now, that is their privilege, their right as an American to believe that. But they can't not follow the law, and the law is very clear. And most Americans, they look at the southern border like they look at their front door. Most Americans lock their front door at night. They don't do that because they hate everybody on the outside. They do that because they love the people on the inside, and they want to know who's coming in and out of their house. And so you can be both for legal immigration and against illegal immigration without being inconsistent. I've just finally concluded that the Democrats, they'd be much more honest intellectually if they'd just say, we don't think there ought to be borders.
It's fascinating how both Victor Davis Hanson and Senator John Kennedy draw a line between compassion and chaos. They're not rejecting immigration itself. They're questioning whether a nation can survive when its own laws become optional. Kennedy's analogy about locking your front door hits deeper than it seems. It's about knowing who you are as a country, not about fearing who's outside. And Hanson's agreement shows how far this debate has drifted from policy into philosophy, whether America still believes in borders, sovereignty, and the rule of law. What follows in their conversation goes even further into how partisanship and defiance of federal authority might push the system past its breaking point.
And you're entitled, under our Constitution, to think the law is immoral. You still have to follow it.
Yeah.
And if I were king for a day, I'm not, and I don't aspire to be, I would do just what the Trump administration is doing. I would enforce the law. I would send in ICE agents. And I would offer to these mayors and governors who clearly have a crime problem, particularly in urban areas, I would offer to also send in law enforcement personnel to help them with their crime problem. I just can't. If I were mayor of a major city today or the governor of a state with a crime problem, I would welcome additional law enforcement help. And it is a mystery to me why the Democrats won't accept it, except that anything President Trump is for, they're against.
Yeah.
If President Trump came out in favor of breathing to survive, the Democrats would hold their breath.
I mean, we've had an order to the Chicago police not to protect ICE agents that were blockaded. One of the people who was conducting that blockade had a semi-automatic rifle.
Yeah.
Arrested. What happens if Mayor Johnson or someone of that extreme viewpoint actually says that I'm going to use law enforcement to stop ISIS? Then you've got something that we've never really encountered in our recent history.
It would be unprecedented.
Yes.
And it would be foolish.
It would be foolish.
I've got rocks in my driveway that are dumber than that. But if he did it, we would have to enforce federal law, because federal law is under the supremacy clause, law that controls, and they're federal statutes. I was constantly shocked, and I tried to be bipartisan. We rejected a handful of President Trump's nominees, but not in every case. But I would say, Professor, in 70% of the cases, President Biden's nominees were activists first and lawyers second. They really had no courtroom experience. They hadn't really thought about the law. And I've said repeatedly to both sides, being a federal judge is a serious thing. You have enormous power. And just because you've seen my cousin Vinny does not qualify you to be a federal judge. For one thing, you got to know the law.
Yeah.
And just basic provisions of the law, like the United States Constitution. It was clear to me that a lot of them had never read it.
What do you think was a turning point in the Democratic Party that made them go, and is it with the Squad, the AOC, the Jasmine Cross, this radical environmentalism, radical transgender? So, these 30, 70 issues they're on, is it the hatred of Trump? Was it building under Obama? What's your diagnosis that happened to this party?
I think it was President Obama. I think there's always been a struggle within the Democratic Party. There's one within the Republican Party, but particularly within the Democratic Party, between what I call the loon wing or the socialist wing and traditional Democrats. President Clinton, brought the Democratic Party back into the mainstream. That's why he was elected twice. President Obama, he moved the party further to the left. He couldn't go as far left as he wanted to, in my judgment, Professor, but he moved it as far as he could. And then President Biden was elected, and most people, I think, who voted for President Biden thought they were getting the second coming of Bill Clinton. Instead, they got the second cousin of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Because so many of President Obama's people were in the White House. And for many of them, it was like a third term. And that's where they came up. And then they allowed the woke wing, the loon wing, if you will, of the party. You had people in the White House who felt nothing but contempt for America. They should have felt gratitude, but they felt contempt for America. You had folks advising the president who think that children should be able to change genders at recess. It was just extraordinary, and that's one of the reasons the Democrats lost the election.
Sort of like the third term that Obama wanted to push that agenda without his fingerprints on it, and that's what he did. You were invited into the White House to talk to Joe Biden. His aides wanted you, kind of grabbed your arm and wanted you out, but you cleverly just said, when he asked you, you want to see the cabinet room, that you were able to extend that visit to 30 or 40 minutes. But you noticed at that time things that bothered you about his physical or mental capacity. And was it your impression that the people around him knew as well as you did from that what was going on?
Oh, yes. I met with President Biden during the midway through his first year. I was probably the only Republican, and very few Democrats, for that matter, who ever spent more than 5 minutes with the president. I spent about 40 minutes with him, and I purposely stayed, ignoring instructions from staff to leave, because I wanted to get a firsthand look at him. Mm-hmm. He was very affable. He was very old. We all age differently, Professor. Yeah. President Biden was old for his years. I got the impression that the White House staff was, and this was early in his first year, was maybe getting 4 or 5 hours worth of worth of work out of him a day. He impressed me. He was at this stage in life where he just wanted to sit around and tell war stories, which he did to me, and talk about the good old days. And after he was finished with that, he wanted a cup of hot soup and an early bedtime. I was just going to say, I could see the beginnings of the neurodegenerative disease at that point.
And I think you mentioned in your book, you were not surprised, or you thought when she was nominated, when she took over or was anointed, that you were, after that meeting, you were not sure that he was going to be able to continue it a second term, right?
I didn't think he could. Well, based on my one meeting with him and my observations as the years went by, it was clear that the president could not have served a second term, and it took embarrassing himself in front of the American people to convince his family and the White House staff. The White House staff deserves a lot of blame for this because they hid it all.
When we talk about the auto pen scandal, and who do you think was there a person? Was it Jill Biden? Was it Ron Clinton? Who's running the country Did we ever figure that out?
We'll probably never know. I think it was on a day-to-day basis. I think the First Lady Biden had a lot of influence. I think Mr. Hunter Biden did. But I think he had an inner circle. A lot of them were President Obama holdovers, and they were calling a lot of the shots day to day. And my people back home in Louisiana would ask me all the time, Professor, they'd say, who is really the president? Because we see President Biden on TV talking like he's from outer space. Who's really doing the job? And I would always tell them, whoever has control of that teleprompter.
In this video, Victor Davis Hanson and Senator John Kennedy deliver one of the most grounded and unapologetic conversations about the state of America today. They don't just debate policy, they dissect a cultural decline where ideology has begun to replace reason and law. Listening to them feels like watching two men trying to hold a mirror to a nation that's forgotten the meaning of responsibility. Hanson's historical clarity meets Kennedy's sharp common sense, and together they remind us that strength without integrity leads to tyranny, while compassion without order leads to chaos. Whether one agrees or not, their message is clear. A country that stops enforcing its laws stops believing in itself.